Despite the long flight to Sydney and leg hop to Newcastle, the bright tennis star appeared refreshed and buoyant. Peter will stay in Newcastle for 2 days before flying to Brisbane, where he'll prepare for the Davis Cup. He says he's in fine form after pulling off the coup of his career, victory over Boris Becker at Wimbledon.
I think the big win certainly helped my career, and it's helped me to get noticed in a lot of other places. I felt I was known in Australia before, but now people in America are going to take notice of me, so it gets me a lot more respect from the other players on the circuit too, so I think it's going to help me a lot. It'll maybe put a little bit more pressure on me too to do well, so at the same time a win like that gives me more incentive to work even harder, so that's what I plan to do.
After his outstanding effort at Wimbledon, it was surprising Australian officials failed to turn on the VIP treatment. The tenacious young man with the devastating on-court form was just another arrival at Sydney Airport. It was left to the media rather than sporting officials to welcome the hero home. In Newcastle, however, it was a different story. Peter's parents, Thelma and Paul Doohan, and sister Margaret, provided a joyous welcoming committee. Peter says he was always confident of performing well at Wimbledon, but he admits after drawing Becker and with the odds stacked against him, self-doubt was inevitable.
I wasn't actually too surprised because it was on grass, and I know I can play well on grass. But I was surprised with to beat Boris Becker, I will admit that, and I thought I could play well, and I was pleased with the way the match was going, and then the further the match went on, I realised that I had a chance to really put Boris away and score a big win.
Were you intimidated by him?
No. One of the main reasons was I played him just 2 weeks before, and I think that was a big help.
It's out.
It's always hard with the crowd and everything, but once I managed to stay even with Boris in the first set, I think that that was the main problem for me, and once I got over the crowd cheering for him, then the crowd started to turn a bit and support me a little bit more, and that really helped me a lot.
Apart from his winnings, Peter was presented with a new watch in the United States that will serve as a permanent reminder of this career highlight. But Peter is determined it's just the beginning.
I think it's going to help me a lot. It'll maybe put a little bit more pressure on me too to do well, so at the same time, a win like that gives me more incentive to work even harder, so that's what I plan to do.
But first, there's time to savour this victory. From the airport, Peter was driven home, where he received another rapturous welcome, worthy of a man who has linked Newcastle to Wimbledon forever.
The last time a grand final was played at the #1 sports ground was in 1981, with the clash between Western Suburbs and Cessnock. West won the match 13-2. And this is the reason for this year's change in venue. The upgrading work at the ISC has made the possibility of staging the big match unlikely. Unperturbed by the change in venue, NRL manager Graham Hartz believes the league can expect a record crowd for the big final at the sports ground.
Well, the International Sports Centre is in the process of being totally reconstructed, and the board feel that it would be dangerous to play any major rugby league fixtures out there at the end of the season. So this is the reason we looked at an alternative venue, and we've come up with the #1 sports ground. Of course, rugby league has been played there for many years, and we believe it's going to be a great day and a good promotion for rugby league to play it there.
I believe the board's also suggested a difference in the semi-finals.
Yeah, sure. We've, again, with the semi-finals, they won't be played at the Sports Centre, and what we are recommending to the General Committee is that the first team into a particular semi-final gets the home ground advantage. So that's something new and innovative. I believe it will work, and in the future as we go down the track we'll probably retain it if it is successful.
This type of playground equipment could soon be a thing of the past if other councils follow Port Stephens Shire Council's lead. The council has decided to remove boat swings and several other types of equipment from 12 of its parks in the Shire, with the view of progressively getting rid of what the council terms as the dangerous equipment from its other 55 parks. The reason is that the parks and their equipment are proving too expensive. The council's $10 million liability insurance premiums have increased almost 300% over the past 2 years to $90,000. A number of claims have also been received from parents whose children have been injured at the council-owned parks. And with the knowledge that if an accident is reported to the court and a child can make a claim against the council after they turn 18, the council says it had no other option. Town Clerk John Walsh says it's also a matter of the money being spent on maintenance of this equipment being needed elsewhere.
Now, if through lack of maintenance in some areas council can be shown to be negligent, well, this far increases the likelihood of claims being lodged successfully.
Mr Walsh says although Port Stephens is the first council in this area to take these hardline measures, it won't be the last.
I think 20 years ago, if you hurt yourself on a bit of equipment, you got fixed up and just carried on, whereas these days we seem to be following the American example where when in doubt you seem to take legal action, and this has caused these high premium increases.
Robert Escott, whose children use the council park, says he's concerned about the decision and he wants to know where his children can play. He says responsibility for children's safety is being placed on society instead of resting with the parents.
Come with them. Instead of letting them play by themselves. If they are old enough, fair enough, but these aged kids, you should be there with them.
Mr Carr says the inclusion of the 120 hectares of bush on the northern headland of Port Stephens is further proof of the state government's commitment to conservation along our coastline. He says now some 58% of the coast between Port Stephens and Foster has been reserved as a national park or a state recreation area. Now both headlands have been reserved as national parks, and he says this is in keeping with the government's policy.
It fits in with our policy of building, piece by piece, what we hope one day will be recognised as the best national park system in the world. New South Wales National Park System is regarded by international conservationists as among the 5 best park systems in the world. We want to get it up there at the very top, and one way of doing that is by seeing that we've got we've got major portions of the New South Wales coast within the park system.
A record 1,170 entrants from 30 different countries were vying for awards in this year's 18th International Wine and Spirit Competition in the United Kingdom. Wyndham Estate, which has entered 4 times previously, continued its outstanding form by winning 9 silver and 15 bronze medals. The company was particularly pleased with the success of 2 of its sparkling wines. The 1983 Semillon Cuvée won a silver and the 1984 Rhine Riesling Cuvée a bronze. But perhaps even more spectacular is that the tiny Hunter Valley winery, Simon Whitlam, has struck gold at the same wine show. Simon Whitlam's 1985 Cabernet Sauvignon, which won a trophy at last year's Royal Easter Show, was judged the outstanding entrant amongst wines in that category. This shows that a small Australian winery can produce wine of the highest international quality.
Regionalisation is part of the community policing scheme adopted by the state's force earlier this year. The new structure will result in 4 regions, each one answering to its own Deputy Commissioner. 2 new police districts in the northern region, one at Maitland, the other at Port Macquarie, will be established. Detective Chief Superintendent of the Criminal Investigation Branch, Tony Lauer, also wears the new hat of the state's investigative commander. Today, before talks with local detectives, he was quick to deny rumours that community policing was established to offset corruption in the force. As with other districts, local police officers are concerned about the changes regionalisation will bring. But the commander said those worries are the result of lack of knowledge.
The major change will be that one of control. Who controls the operations of the CIB, and that will now be placed locally on geographic. Currently, detectives are controlled across the state according to the function they perform from the CIB. That will no longer be the position. There'll be control where they are and where they work.
The CIB is to become a more specialised unit, and the force says that won't happen overnight.
The state's investigative commander says that in 10 years' time, the force and the community will have a much stronger and closer bond. But there's no doubt that the success of regionalisation will be weighed up when the changes will ultimately mean a depletion in the ranks at Newcastle.
It's not the first time Peter has been chosen to play Davis Cup for Australia. He played in the first round clash with Yugoslavia during March in Adelaide, where he teamed up with Pat Cash in the doubles. Peter says this time around he'd like to play singles.
My form's pretty good at the moment, and I'd like to go in there with Pat Cash and play for Australia in the singles. I played with Cash in the doubles last time and we went pretty well, but either way, as long as I get a chance to play for Australia, I'll be happy.
How do you think the team will go against Mexico?
Oh, I think we'll do pretty well on form, but tennis is a funny game. All of a sudden, the underdog can win, as I found out at Wimbledon, so Mexico could be a real surprise. We'll have to really take care and make sure that we're playing at our best.
A win against Mexico will put Australia into the semi-finals against either Israel or India in Sydney during October. Peter flew to Brisbane late today for a week's practice with the Australian team before next Friday's start in the tie against Mexico.
With the downturn in the coal industry and world coal prices slumping to an all-time low, it's not surprising that coal companies are trying to rationalise their operations. At the same time, it's understandable that miners, worried about their jobs, want to cut out overtime to ensure that everyone has work. But the issue of overtime has become a hot potato. The unions say that coal companies eventually plan to reduce the workforce but maintain productivity using overtime. The issue has particularly come to a head with Coal and Allied. Workers at the Hunter Valley, Liddell and Hexham coal preparation plants were stood down yesterday for refusing to supply labour this weekend. At Stockrington No. 2 mine, miners refused to perform certain tasks between shifts and were placed on a no work, no pay basis.
Our first impulse reaction when there's retrenchments is to try and maximise the amount of jobs that we can maintain in the industry. And when the industry is flowing normally, there has been an attitude taken that we would work a reasonable amount of overtime. Now, even in the midst of prosperity, we've restricted our people to 7 hours overtime a week in the interests of employment, because we're aware outside there's a lot of people unemployed. Now, when it hits right at home, when we're talking about people being retrenched, naturally the conscious view of our people is to accommodate as many of those people as we can with regard to re-employment in other mines or the maintenance of those people in the existing mines.
But according to Coal and Allied's General Manager Cole Harrison, for the company to hold its efficiency, it's essential that a certain amount of overtime be worked. He says overtime provides the flexibility to allow the mines to work reasonably efficiently.
That's the very bottom line.
In summing up, Magistrate Meehan said that if convicted, the defendants could face life imprisonment. It was therefore in the public interest, he said, to ensure that they appeared for trial and set bail of $5,000 for 5 of the men. The 6th man was bailed on $1,000 with a 3-year good behaviour bond.
"44-year-old Dennis Wayne Newman was found dead in Zara Street, Newcastle, just before 6 o'clock last night. He was found by a nearby shopkeeper and friend. Newman had been on remand for an assault charge and was well known to police, with a long list of criminal convictions.
Well, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder some years ago, a murder which was committed here in Newcastle. Whilst he was in serving that life sentence, he was, quite some years ago, involved in the notorious riot at the Bathurst jail when the jail was destroyed. He, in fact, was one of the ringleaders of that.
Because of his criminal behaviour, his death was first thought to have been a gangland killing.
Initially, it certainly had all the earmarks of being suspicious. Of course, having in mind his antecedents and his background and the apparent injuries. However, the preliminary findings of the post-mortem were that he has suffered a massive heart attack, and resulting in him falling quite heavily to the ground, and the injuries that he suffered are consistent with that happening.
The event is organised by the Newcastle and Lake Macquarie Skateboard Association and has drawn competitors from Sydney and the Central Coast. The course is simply a set of ramps, and to score points, competitors have to not only make their way through the array of jumps, but also show their ability at freestyle skateboarding. Winner of the under-12s was Bradley Mazzata. In the girls section, Georgia Kerr took the title. In the under-15s, Andrew Waters was the winner. The under-18s was jointly taken out by Michael McDonald and James Clark. And the open section was won by Anthony Simmons. While the course looked easy enough, there were some hefty spills, which kept the crowd of onlookers fascinated.
This prime waterfront site is set to go under the auctioneer's hammer in Sydney on Thursday. It's being billed by the auctioneers, LJ Hooker, as a possible site for a hotel convention centre and was expected to sell for around $2 million. However, the commercial value of the site is in serious doubt, following what archaeologists say is a significant find. This includes an early 1800s lumberyard and stockade where convicts once toiled. It all began about 18 months ago when Dr. John Turner from Newcastle University's History Department discovered these bricks. The land is owned by the State Rail Authority, and Dr. Turner tried to get an archaeologist appointed to carry out a dig on the site to find out its value. He says after 18 months of procrastination, an archaeologist was eventually appointed, but the delay meant there was little time to determine the significance of the site. Despite the rush, Dr. Turner is convinced it's worth preserving.
It's extremely significant. We've had a lot of time to build up to this in our studies, and now we've confirmed what we suspected. We've got a prime historical site here.
What's so important about it? I mean, what have you found?
What we've found is a complete working place where the convicts laboured over many years when Newcastle was a convict settlement, where they worked with iron, where they produced picks, axes, miners' tools, all the significant items used in this convict settlement. And what we're doing here now, what we are obliged to do, but what we would probably choose to do anyway, is to cover it in with soil as gently as possible so that no damage will occur and so that we can in the future reveal it, let us hope, to the citizens of Newcastle for permanent preservation.
His view is shared by Dr Damis Bierstow, the government-appointed archaeologist. She says she'll be calling the Heritage and Conservation branch to recommend that an interim conservation order be placed on the property as soon as possible.
The Northern Vice President of the Miners' Federation, Jeff Brown, says a joint mining union meeting will be held in Sydney in the morning, followed by a joint coal board hearing, attended also by state and federal government representatives. Mr Brown was non-committal on the possibility of a national stoppage if a coal marketing authority doesn't eventuate.
Well, that will be addressed at the National Liaison Committee tomorrow morning. And at this stage I wouldn't be prepared to comment on what may come out of that meeting, because it will be followed by a meeting of the Joint Coal Board at 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, where all parties will submit their recommendations on a savings situation for the industry.
But there has been very strong suggestion that we could be facing a national stoppage.
There has been suggestions, and I suppose you could look at the situation and say that we desperately need a national marketing authority within the coal industry, and hopefully that's what the government will be coming forward tomorrow.
But a marketing authority would achieve nothing, according to the Executive Director of the Colliery Proprietors Association, Barry Ritchie. Dr Ritchie spoke in Sydney earlier today to John Gatfield.
The coal industry is Australia's largest export earner. It's the largest world exporter of coal. It's done that by the companies getting out and selling coal. How can anybody else do it better than the companies have done it?
A national authority would not help at all?
Not at all. All the National Coal Authority would do would be to put restrictions in the way in which companies work, and would slow down the process, and we would lose revenue.
It is understandable, though, that the mine unions are very concerned about the loss of jobs over the years, and we're talking about, 30,000 miners going on strike because they are concerned for their future.
I can understand that concern, but we export in a world market, not in a domestic market, and we are subject to the forces of the world. There's nothing we can do about it. No authority can change the prices that we sell out into the world. No Australian government can tell the Chinese government not to sell coal into the world. And we are just caught in that, and we have to live with that. It's one of the risks.
As I understand it, the unions are saying that the private employers, the companies, are going out and cutting each other's prices, cutting each other's throats, just to sell one lot of coal overseas somewhere. So therefore, if you had a national authority to regulate this and more or less set a price, things would be better.
Well, that's quite untrue. In the Japanese market, which is about 50% of our market, we get better prices than the Colombians and the Chinese and the South Africans. We got $2 US better than they did in the last round of steaming coal negotiations. And the reason we got that was because the Australian producers refused to agree, even to the point where the Japanese wouldn't send ships, and the companies had to grow into real cash flow difficulties in order to fight that off. But they did, and they got better prices. The government couldn't do that.
Premier. The possibility of a national stoppage has the Queensland Premier, Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen, threatening legal action against any miner in his state who takes part.
Well, Queensland has a tremendous opportunity of gaining new markets, better markets, additional markets, and if we go and ruin it like this by a strike, I can't believe it. I don't think they will.
Prime Minister Hawke has called for a national conference involving all in the industry. Is that a possible solution?
No. That's one of these old consensus type of operations that we've had. The first summit, the second summit, and 50 other summits, and he's having consensus with the unions now as to whether we can have a second minister here in Queensland. Honestly, who runs the country? I told you every time. It's the militant unions, the socialists, the communists, and all the rest of them.
So what you want to see, if the miners decide to strike, is positive action. You'll respond with the legislation.
Well, I want to say I hope, and I don't believe they will. I don't think they'd be so foolish as to jeopardise their own livelihoods. There's no way I think these people will do that. But I say, not to them, but to the mining union leaders, they would be in for deep trouble.